Okay, is everybody ready? Is everybody ready? Is everybody ready now? Yes, outstanding. Russ, would you like to say a couple of words about our presenter before we proceed?
Sure. Thanks, Ron. For those of you who may not have been to one of Bruce's other presentations, Bruce is the equivalent of an MMR in the Santa Fe modelers group. And as you'll Barry alluded to, this is a pretty detailed kit. And I think if Bruce mentions it in his presentation here that Yarmouth only made a certain amount of these cars. But if you want to, after Bruce presentation, if it gets your interest that you'd like to have a helium car on your layout to probably go to some industry that the old AHM made one. And there's been a few articles on how to beef that up to make it look a little bit better. It won't look as good as Bruce's car here, but you won't have to spend as much time on it. So, Bruce, thanks for coming in again today, and I'll let you take it away.
Well, thank you, Russ. Thank you, Ron, for having me back to the Division 8 stage. It's a pleasure to be here. In honor of coming today, I went and got a fresh haircut yesterday. You don't want that? Had to look good for the show. All right. I want to talk about helium cars, like Russ introduced there. History a bit about them, operations, where they went, what they did, and then finding a kit to build of a helium car for my railroad. And I'll talk a little bit about what's available out there and why I chose this one, and then what it took to build it. And with Barry's comment in the beginning, yes, this was the most complicated model railroad car kit I've ever built. Not impossible, but you kind of stretch your skills in some of your modeling areas when you're doing one like this. If you give me a choice of buying a ready-made car or a nice kit to build, I would always choose buying the kit. But there's a lot of model cars on my railroad I have that were bought right off the shelf, out of the box, treat them with weathering or whatever's appropriate, and then put it on the railroad. So I do that too. Anyway, early this year, I found out that Yarmouth Model Works, it's a company up in Canada, it's run by a guy named Pierre Oliver, was going to produce a model in HO scale of a helium car. And I'd known these cars had been around for a while, but I didn't really have much interest in it. So I put my brain to work, and using the world famous internet and Mr. Google, I did a lot of research to find out when they were in use, where they went in the country, how many there were, what they looked like, things like that. And especially the time frame to find out if it would be appropriate for my railroad. And I model Santa Fe in the desert Southwest in 1967. It's nailed down that specifically. So I went to work on it and found out basically a lot of the answers fell into place and said this would be an appropriate car for my railroad. Where did I get this information? There's a guy named Jay Miller who's been around a long time, and he is probably the world's foremost modeling authority. Helium tank cars and their use on railroads. You could look at a lot of his materials. It's available on YouTube. He's got 4 videos there. They're not long, they're not overbearing, but they're very detailed and informative. Plus, there's a lot of printed material available. Amarillo Railroad Museum, they have a helium car there, and they have a bunch of documentation about the helium cars. It's all available on the internet. A guy named Tony Thompson, he runs a website called Modeling the SP. And he has a bunch of information about helium cars there. And that also provided a link to get to the Santa Fe group that I and Barry are members of there. There's a bunch of information on there about helium cars, and especially as it applied to the Santa Fe. And if you're just really curious, just go to the internet and put in railroad helium cars, and you get 147,619 references in 0.08 seconds, or some obscene number like that. There's a lot of information out there. Okay, started to get curious. What is helium? What do you do with it? Where do you get it? Where does it go? Stuff like that to kind of build the knowledge base leading up to getting and building this car kit. It's a chemical element. It's number 2. It's lighter than air. It's an inert gas. It's got a lot of industrial uses, electronics, things like that, leak detection. NASA uses it in their space vehicles to help pressurize fuel tanks. Over the last 3 or 4 months here, it got real famous, the Boeing Starliner that launched 2 astronauts to the space station, and they couldn't come home in it because of helium leaks. They didn't know if it was going to perform properly or not, so they're stuck on there until next spring. They're going to come back on one of Musk's capsules, I guess. Anyway, NASA uses it. Meteorologists launch the weather balloons using helium. You go to the party store and buy a happy birthday balloon. It's got helium in it. There's a little side note. Has anybody ever taken that thing and opened it up and sucked the helium out and listened to your voice afterwards? Don't do it more than about 3 times without stopping to breathe air, because you're taking the oxygen away from your brain and it starts to go stupid. Okay.
That explains it.
Divers in the Navy and other sources there, they can extend their time underwater. They can go deeper when they start mixing helium and a couple other gases in with the air they're breathing. They displace the nitrogen out of the atmosphere that they're breathing, and it gives them more time and more capability to do diving. Up until the late 1950s, the Navy used to have balloons, and they were filled with helium, and they were flown by pilots and crews, and they basically would work in coastal areas looking for submarines. That was their mission at the time. Barrage balloons at World War II, they put them like on the D-Day invasion up along the beach so the German fighters couldn't strafe the troops trying to get ashore. Some of you know, I was in the naval aviation business for part of my life. Our wings are a shield with 2 wing things out the side there. The balloon pilots only had 1 wing.
We did.
Don't know why, but that's the way.
Good. Did Brian go?
Hello.
Hello.
Right, you got that?
And also the world famous Goodyear blimps and many of the other companies used for both advertising and sports coverage. I have actually flown in a Goodyear blimp, and not part of the briefing, but after the brief, if somebody wants to hear about how that was, I'd be glad to explain it to you. So anyway, that's what helium is used for. Where does it come from? It comes from generally in natural gas deposits, and in the south central US United States, Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas have been a traditional source of helium. The helium plant draws the gas out of the earth, separates the helium from the gas, diverts the helium to helium uses, and the natural gas goes into the pipeline system that we use for a stove and furnace and whatever else we got it for down there. Places where the helium plants were, the little blue dots on the chart there, shows where the actual plants were that processed the helium gas and made it available. I understand, this has been out about a year now, news from someplace. Up in Minnesota, they are finding huge deposits of helium now that they never knew about before. So maybe we'll see that come into the world. Now, the railroads don't transport it anymore, but at least it's another source other than these traditional areas. Photograph of a helium plant. You can see on the side here, the helium tank cars staged either for filling or cleaning and reuse over there. But that's where the actual process of separating the helium from the natural gas would occur. And again, those are the blue dots on the map there. That's where they were. Okay, Russ alluded to talking about other railroads too. And Barry, it came as a shock to me. There are other railroads besides Santa Fe. Who would have ever thought something like that? Anyway, the helium plants, Amarillo, serviced by the Rock Island. I would have thought Santa Fe would have been there, but their tracks might have been over here and the helium plant over there, so they wouldn't connect. Otherwise, Santa Fe, and I'm not highlighting Santa Fe, it's just the way it worked out. XL, Texas, Keys, Cunningham, even over into New Mexico. And then the Missouri Pacific took care of Otis up in Kansas. That's where the helium was sourced from the plants, loaded into tank cars and shipped wherever.
Bruce, the first picture you had a couple earlier, don't go there. And made a comment about the Bureau of Reclamation or somebody. Is it basically manufactured by the government?
Yes.
Okay, so they're the manufacturer.
Yes, and I'm going to show you in some of the models here, they're all in government-owned, government agency-owned tank cars that it was shipped. I'm guessing today it goes by truck. I don't really know, but I know the railroads don't haul it around anymore. Okay, that's where it comes from, the railroads that handle it. So if you're a modeler of Missouri Pacific or Rock Island, very conceivable you could have the helium cars on your railroad. Another one, and this is Santa Fe specific, but it shows some of the other railroads that Santa Fe handed it off to get to some of these destinations. Santa Fe didn't go to Cape Canaveral, so they gave it to like Florida East Coast or whoever their name is today, or up until the helium cars went away to get there. I did some of my Navy flying at a place called Glencoe, Georgia. And they quit there in 1959. They had blimps at Glencoe, Georgia. And when I was there in 1969, 2 blimp hangars were still there, and they are huge. You could put a couple football stadiums inside them because you remember how big blimps are. But anyway, more reason to say if you model any of those other railroads, there's conceivably you could have helium cars on.
Yeah, and Bruce,
Yes, Russell.
yeah, pardon me for interrupting, but while you have that slide up, I don't know how easy it is for the guys in the library there, but if you notice, there's down towards the bottom, L&N and a couple of different Southerns that the Santa Fe handed it off to. So there you go.
Yeah, that's based St. Louis, Missouri. There's a huge rocket test facility down in that area. And when the space shuttle was still around, that's where they built the external tanks for the space shuttle, that huge thing that would fill with liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. So yeah, L&N was even included in that group, which is now CSX. Okie dokie. All right. How'd the helium get to the destinations they wanted it to go to? So I'll ask the question, what are we talking about here today? Helium tank cars. This is the photograph of one. This happens to be, it looks like a 3rd generation car. I'll explain what that means shortly. 1961, it's a year old. Little quick pointers here I'm going to show you, but they're all lettered and run by government agencies. They were never owned and operated by individual railroads. They're an AAR designation, TMU, tank car specialized, even though it has no visible resemblance to what we consider a tank car. That's what it was called. Empty weight of these cars was around 235 plus or minus 1,000 pounds. And there was a bunch of weight saving measures in the cars. They didn't have roofs. They didn't have filled in underframes like a box car or a cattle car or a refrigerated car would. Very open on the sides. They had end cabinets on them that housed a lot of the piping and valves and equipment to handle the helium while it's in the car. And I found out there's a whole bunch of jokes about this that have been running around for years and years. Somebody once said, well, if you fill the car with helium, will it be lighter? At atmospheric pressure, maybe a pound or 2 lighter. But you fill these things with 3,000 PSI of helium, and that's going to show you on another slide. That's almost 250,000 cubic feet of helium. The helium load weighed about 1,500 pounds. So I hope the railroads build on the fact I'm shipping this car, not on the weight of the shipment that's going someplace. So helium is very light. Okay, several generations, several iterations of cars. The oldest ones from the 20s were used by both the Army and the Navy for their uses. Big 3 tanks on a car. I don't know how much the capacity was. I couldn't find out anything like this. But there were 3 cars total from the 1920s. Then along came what we call the 1st generation car. It had 28 tubes on. And I think what I see, everything after that had 30, is up in the top corner on the left and right side of the car. There's enough of a gap where another tube theoretically could be placed. But they had only 28 tubes made by General American and their factory. Only 5 cars from this group existed. And then they went to a 2nd generation car and they got up to 30 tubes and they filled in that upper corner on each side of the top to bring the total up to 30. And one of the spotting features is just like that one and this one, the side supports were all vertical. Then along came the 3rd generation, a 30 tube car, and they had 71 cars in that group there. And you can see the difference in the sides. The side bracing, they got vertical and diagonal bracing on the side. And every car after this group looked like that. They never went back to anything that looked that. It's not responding. There we go. All right. Every car after that first one there, that third group had 30 tubes on it. Minor variations in the equipment, different builders, different techniques in certain areas. Maybe they ran the piping and the valves inside different or had different safety equipment on the car, something like that. Fourth generation cars, 72 of them there. First ones with roller bearing trucks rather than friction bearing trucks and a metal roof walk on those cars. Again, very similar in appearance. These are made by ACF. ACF built those cars. All right, 4.5 generation, company called Darby. No idea what the differences are. The cars are virtually identical in appearance though. And even 5th generation cars out of ACF, 6th out of Magor, 7th out of ACF, and even an 8th generation car by Magor. And there's the number of cars that each one produced there. Again, just minor variation differences in what the car would be equipped with. But visually, you line them all up, you probably couldn't tell the difference, except by reading the number on the side and going to a chart. Down at Amarillo, I said they had one in the museum there. This is that car with one of the end doors open. You can see the ends of the tubes. Here's another photograph looking at the manifold there and some of the valves. And who's that dude in the suit? They must have sent somebody out the office to pose to make it look official or something. Anyway, so that's what inside these end cabinets, the equipment needed to handle the loading, unloading, and controlling of the helium while it's in the car. Again, 1967, I have a copy of the official railway equipment register. So I went to go look, this is more of my research, how appropriate would this car be for me? And it shows at that time frame, there was one first generation car in service. That was from the 1930s, remember? There were 4 cars from the second generation and 228 cars from all the rest of the production for a total of 233 cars still in service at the end of 1967. There's some information it had here, how much capacity. There's one, the last generation, 279,000 cubic feet of helium they could get into that car, which totaled about 1,500 pounds of weight. Notice also it said here, no work to be performed on the interior of these cars without approval of the Bureau of Mines. So very restrictive on, if the railroad had an issue with a car, they'd have to, get the experts in there to take care of it. Another chart talking about how many cars are out there. Navy, ATMX, MHAX, that's the variations in the different government agencies that own them. And going back here to the end of 67, we're up here at about 233 cars, which the chart showed me. Best I could find out is in the early 2000s is when these cars went away. They weren't left in service after that. And that's when I think probably the only other way to move this stuff around was by trucks on the highways. Okay, models of helium cars. What's available out here, or what was available that I could have used to build a model with? Ambroid made some, not a bad looking model. I built lots of other Ambroid kits along the way in my life, wood and stamped metal kind of stuff. One of the comments on the internet, you read at some of these sites here, the end of the tubes look like they were tapered in a pencil sharpener. Take a piece of dowel and go, and that puts the taper on the end there. Made it look a little unprototypical there. Northeastern Scale Models, also wood-based kit. They published plans. You could go buy all their strip wood yourself and build it, or they actually made a kit you could buy and build this car. On eBay, you can still find the Ambroid kits. They're still listed out there today. Long time ago, a company called Sterling Models, the 1940s, they actually had a kit for a helium car back in that time frame. And this amazed me, cost 75 cents. I don't know what that would be in today's dollars, but less than you throw a buck on the counter, you get a car kit and a quarterback. All right, Pecos River brass. A lot of times we get in our mind that a brass model is superb. It's got perfect detail. It's high quality. It's the best you can get. A lot of times that can be a true statement. And the Pecos River car looks pretty decent. It's got a lot of the rivet detail on it and everything, the stirrup steps. But I found out that the tubes were a stamping. They're not individual tubes. So you hold up the car sideways and look at it, you can't see anything inside. Whereas these are all individual tubes that went into this car and the prototype car. Now, the cheap ones, AHM plastic, it's a crude looking model. It would suffice if you say, yeah, I wanted to have a helium car. Couple idiosyncrasies here. They were never painted anything but gray or silver. You never saw any colored car. And you never saw one lettered for a specific railroad. This one says New York Central. Sorry, Russell. So AHM car. Roco, same kind of thing here. Very crude, very basic. Union Pacific. Sorry, Ron. And of course, the wrong color. It's got to be gray or silver. Another one, Concept Models. They deal a lot, and Bob Frankrone probably is familiar with this outfit. They make Schnabel cars. They make other load-looking things that you would put on your open-top cars. This one is all one piece. You buy it. It came without trucks and couplers. And I'm going to spend a little time talking specifically about trucks. Up until recently, there was never a correct truck for these cars. And keeping in mind that they weighed near 250,000 pounds, this is a heavy car. So anyway, Concept Models, that was one other source. Now, current times here, very current. A company called Beaver Models. They will make a car for you in any one of 3 scales, and it would fit in probably a 40-some year time frame there, depending on when you wanted to model that car. It's a 3D printed resin car, and 3D model. There's some 3D parts on here I'll point out to you. 3D has become a common way to produce models. I found this on their website. It takes about 12 hours to build a kit with the printer doing all the work. Major pieces, all one piece there, rather than, I prefer, detail parts. And the last one I did the research on, and this is what keyed the whole thing in the beginning, is Pierre Oliver at Yarmouth Model Works was coming out with his version of a helium car. 3rd generation car, very carefully researched, highly detailed kit that is going to make available, complete with correct trucks. The Beaver model also has correct trucks, but this one would have the correct trucks for it. And that's the one I chose to do. Why Yarmouth? Well, I like the details. I've built probably about 9 or 10 Yarmouth kits. I'm familiar with how they go together. They make box cars and other kind of cars there. And greater fidelity, and this is, I underlined it there, this is my impression. You know, I put that car next to some of the others and I can see the obvious differences in the appearance there. For example, the Beaver car printed, all of the operating rods and the locking mechanism for the doors on the end cabinets are printed on, and in this case, they're highlighted probably with black paint. Whereas on my car, the Yarmouth car, they are all individual pieces that are put on that car. So you can see depth to them, you can see behind them, you can see through them, things like that. The underframe, the Beaver car is all one piece. And this is the first view I'm going to show you, but there's no flooring in these cars. And again, I think it's a weight saving measure. When they built it, they didn't need the floor. The tubes are supported by the car structure. And the Yarmouth is a totally complete, everything is independent. Reservoir, regulator valves, brake valve itself, or the brake cylinder itself, all the rods for the brake gear, the piping for the air for the system. And point out here to start, I think I mentioned it a little while ago, this car has 2 completely independent brake systems with it. Each brake system is one truck. And it operates on the idea that the car is so heavy, it needed more braking capability, more braking power. It still has an A and a B end. There's only one brake wheel, and it's at the B end, and it only affects one of the 2 brake systems. It's only linked to one of them. So they figure if they can, with the brake wheel, they can put the brakes on one. As long as it's not moving, it's probably not going to go anywhere. So again, more fidelity, more detail was my preference on how to do this. Etched parts. They got some neat ladders in here. They're very easy to build. Doesn't take very long at all. There's a jig to hold them in place while you're making them. Even better detail than the printed on stuff that some of the other manufacturers have. Okay, this is what you get in the kit. Roof walk, some of the other associated detail parts with it. The parts for the tanks themselves, and it consists of 3 things. The end cabinets, which are the 3D printed parts. I'm gonna call these the dummy ends, and I'll show you how they go together to put it together, or to make the tube block. There's that thing again.
Battery went low.
Uh-oh.
Not to worry, Bruce.
Thank you. How do you get rid of it? There we go. And the tubes themselves, it's a 30-tube car, but you only get 18 tubes because the inside is hollow, so we need to see the ones on the outside. The sides and underframe, these are urethane castings there. You can see, hopefully on the screen, enough resolution. There's the side frames with the X's and the diagonal things, but there's a whole lot of carry material in there that all has to be cleaned out before you can assemble the car. And the same for the underframes. Remember, it's open on the bottom, but the casting has all that stuff in, you got to clean out of it there. Proper decals, 2 complete brake systems for the car. Remember, it's got 2 sets of brakes. The correct trucks from a company called 3D Central, and they have not been available until about a year ago. Pierre liaisoned with them, told them what he needed, why he needed it, and they went to work and created the trucks. On the 3D Central website, they probably have 20 or 30 different kinds of trucks you can buy. Some of the more obscure ones for your models if you want them, and even the regular common ones. And I was able to, this kit had the correct trucks in it. And then a lot of etchings for detail parts that go on the side, the steps, the ladders, the handholds, the grabs, things like that. The material on the roof that supports the top of the car, the material that supports the roof walk and the laterals themselves are all etched parts there that add more realism and more detail to the car. Trucks, 3D Central. They have solid bearing, they have roller bearing, the different styles appropriate for all the cars. And again, this is only one of their line of trucks, sort of a little commercial for them there. I have bought other trucks for them for other projects. But this is the first time correct trucks for any Helium car has come along. The plastic ones have some crude mock-up of a Bettendorf truck or things like that. Not appropriate for the car because they weren't correct, my feeling. There's the tube block. The dummy ends and the tubes are glued together to form the tube block. And this is with the last 6 tubes not applied yet. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6 more slots. You have to be very careful to make sure that things are vertical and 90 degrees, make sure everything is aligned straight. This is also the part in the instructions, and I brought 12 pages of instructions along with it. This is the part where they say, if you want to add weight to your car, it's time to do it. Put it inside the tube block. At this point, I got out my scale and put all the major components on the scale and weighed it, and it is above the NMRA recommended weight for this car. You don't have to add any weight to it unless you really want to. All right. The end cabinets, these screws into there so I could handle it while I was painting and doing stuff like that. Doors on the ends, louvers. The inside has 60 holes or 30 holes on each one for when you put the tube block into the end cabinets. And it said right up front in the instructions, these holes need to be drilled out. They are not big enough. They are not deep enough. So there you are with your pin vise or your Dremel tool on slow, drilling 60 more holes or expanding 60 holes so that you can get the tube block in and everything will be vertical, horizontal, spaced, sized exactly right. Okay, there's the tube block. There's the end cabinets ready to be assembled. I did the priming and paint, or not the painting, but the priming and cleaning everything up prior. So when you start assembling it, at least on the inside, it's going to be taken care of. And there it is assembled. There's a couple pieces of brass channel that go along the top, but end cabinets, the tube block in the middle, all assembled, ready for the next step. The underframe, showed you the picture before. 2 complete brake systems, complete with rigging, air piping, all the things, cross members, everything that belongs on the underframe is put together in there. Now it's mounted to the underframe. If you look real close, you can see there's a little space. It's probably in the real world no more than 18 or 24 inches long. This was the importance of getting the assembly, the tube block, the correct length, and get everything square and perpendicular and horizontally, everything lined up. so it fits correctly on the underframe. So it's not cocked, so it's not too long, not too short, not too wide. Very, very important, and they bring this out several times about how carefully you have to build that tube block before putting it on the underframe. There's some of the brass parts attached already. We got details on the end cabinet sides and the roof that add, in my opinion, and you can look at it here, a lot more realism to the car because it's not just a smooth, shiny cast surface. Okay. About 1964, they changed the color of the cars from gray to silver. So I'm in 1967, as I mentioned. I decided I'd have a silver car. So that's why I painted it silver. There's the side frame, so all that carry material removed. It took a long time to cut all that out and file and sandpaper to go in there and smooth up all the edges and make it nice and presentable for painting and assembly. And there's everything put together with the exception of some of the final detail parts, roof walk, couple of cup levers, things like that. I tend to go to the point where ready to put my decals on and leave a lot of those other parts off because I'm doing a lot of handling for decals. You got to, lay it, turn it around, put decal solution on it, all that stuff. I find it's easier if it's a later attached part, there's less likelihood I'm going to damage it or break it or do anything like that. So there's the car ready for the final step. There's a photograph of one side of the car, the right side of the car, lettered, all the final details put on it, sitting on the railroad. There's the left side of the same car, same thing. Everything is finally complete on the car. And here's the car literally right here. Right? You're welcome to come up and look at it if you want. Here's all the instructions. Carl brought in, for your show and tell table here, a car I had never seen before. And again, going all the way back to the beginning of the spring and the research I'd been doing, I have no idea who made that car. We think it may be partially done by Athearn by looking at the underframe. It's relatively heavy. It's only got about, I don't know, what we count? 9 tubes in it. It doesn't match any of the prototypes that J. Miller or any of the other sources highlighted. It's got open ends. You can see the piping for the tubes in one end of it there. Relatively heavy. It's lettered correctly for one of the government agencies, but again, we have no clue anything about that car. He got it, where'd you say it?
Roundhouse.
Roundhouse.
Yeah, that's right.
Bob Dawson has told me he has actually seen the real thing of these cars.
Yeah, Danville, early 90s,
Yeah,
2 of them in a contest.
okay. Probably headed, who knows where, somewhere on the
They
East
were
Coast,
going-
probably.
Northbound through Danville, so Kentucky. So.
Yeah. So we have a real live witness of seeing these cars exist here.
I'll sign an affidavit.
Okay, if you've seen any of my other presentations, you probably know I usually end each one with a little video. Here's one I shot riding in a Santa Fe freight train on my railroad.
There you go. Very nice.
I didn't catch the fact that it was short.
It's about 40 feet.
40 feet.
Okay, can you get this car? Right now, today is a big question mark. Pierre offered him initially back in the late spring, and I got in quick enough. I got my money in the bag and I got one of the cars to work on and build. And then he shut him off because he was going to take his remaining stock to 2 of the railroad prototype modelers meets and then open it up for sales afterward. He was going to hope to sell some at those 2 meets. The last one ended last week, October 12th. As of this morning, they are still listed like this. The sales are suspended on his website. So if you really want to inquire, he's got an email link on his website. Just search for Yarmouth Model Works and everything is there, along with all the other models he builds. He builds an O and S scale too, but being an HO kind of guy. I also found out that there are at least 2 N scale models of helium cars. One of them was done by Atlas a bunch of years ago. And I saw a picture of the other one, but I have no clue. There was nothing I could find about what company manufactured it. And we saw that Beaver does them in S and O. So there are some other scale cars available out there. But again, if you want to pursue anything like this, just check Yarmouth Model Works, maybe something, right? Send them an email. Say, hey, you got any cars for sale?
If I tell them I'm a personal friend of Bruce's, Is that gonna get me anywhere?
Probably not,
Um,
but it's worth a try. All righty. Questions, comments? All
I got one, Bruce.
right, Russell.
When it came to doing the roofs and everything that was in brass, did you solder that together, or CA, or epoxy, or?
CA, ACC, whatever you want to call it. The only places that the brass touches each other is from the two sides and the roof of the end cabinet, and they meet at that seam where the roof touches the side. I don't see any real need to get to the extent of soldering. That they are sized very correctly, very accurately, so I really only had to do or didn't have to do any trimming or modification of the part. It's just bending them to the right contour to fit the roof of the end cabinets. And then a few drops inside and put them together and hold them till it, till it's tight. And that's all it took.
Okay, good.
The ladders were built, you get individual stiles, and the rungs, you put two stiles in the jig they give you to build the ladders with. Make sure they're even. And then I would take each one of the stiles, dip the tip in the ACC or CA and drop it in the holes. There was no drilling or anything involved like that. You just drop them in and build your ladder their way. And it took like 4 minutes to build each one of the ladders. And there's 4 ladders on the car, correctly sized, the right number of rungs, everything you needed.
What was the great difficulty with the car?
Working with the dummy ends and the end cabinets. And then also ensuring that it would fit square and evenly on the frame, the underframe. Other than that, it's just making and applying parts.
If you think about the payload weight to weight of car.
1,500 pounds
1,500
versus almost
pounds
a quarter
of
million pounds. Like I said, I hope they didn't build by the weight of the payload, that they build by shipping a car someplace.
Probably had heavy because it's under such pressure.
Yeah. Well, an empty car, 235,000
Yeah, it had
pounds,
some
a
heavy
full car,
materials.
236,500.
I don't know, do you know where they were cascaded, or were they each tube and?
Well, going all the way back to the end cabinet view there, it looked like they were, each tube had piping associated with that fed into a manifold. And then valve on each tube where they could selectively either fill or empty a tube. That's what it looked like.
Makes sense.
Similar to the chlorine gas racks they used at power plants. Chlorine was on a manifold. They would divide in current, and then when this was running out, you would cut it over to these and then have the others taken out by crane to a rail car or truck. And
Okay.
they were real heavy duty because they had chlorine gas. And that's when power plants usually chlorinated their own water. So it was a specialty car. They used them at Patty's Run Station until up until the 80s.
To the 80s, okay.
Yeah, they chlorinated their own water.
Like I said, these lasted, the best I could tell, into the early 2000s, and then they all went away after that.
Power plants used hydrogen for cooling, and that came in by tanker truck. I never saw it come in by rail car, only came by tanker truck. That's
Very.
What
brand
silver paint do you use?
This happened to be Tamiya on this particular one. I found, they gave a reference in here to an oddball paint company I've never heard of. If you're going to paint it gray, they talked about Mr. Color number 325 gray. And of course, I went on the internet, Fred's shaking his head, yeah, on the internet, and I found a conversion chart, and that equated to Tamiya. I wrote the number down here someplace. Medium gray XF20. And that's what I prepared to do it with until my research showed that eventually they became silver. And I just made the decision here to just paint it as silver. And it's just a light gloss silver. And you can either enhance it with some gloss overspray or knock it down with some flat overspray, depending on what your preference is.
I think Mr. Color specializes in airbrush paint, right, Fred?
Yep.
All right, guys, gals.
Well, hey, Bruce, one more for me, please.
Yes, sir.
The best, that the railroads dropped out of shipping it versus truck, was it just, over the years, less demand, either, Navy wise or, the other, whatever the different, areas that needed the helium for, weather balloons or whatever? Was it, just didn't send up as much weather balloons, or,
Russell, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know, but I'm gonna guess part of it might have been the age of the cars. There were no built in later years, and they probably eventually wore out. And maybe the truckers came along with a better deal saying, we can ship it and haul it for this amount of money and whatever. So, Mike.
Yeah, back then, the railroads, as they still do now, have a very hard 50-year mandatory retirement on a car. When it's 50 years old, it's gone, done. No questions, no ifs, ands, or buts.
Send it
Now
to the
it's 40
museum.
years with some wiggle room to get another 10 years out of it. But back then it was 50 and out. So those cars probably all just aged out, and the expense of building new ones, and probably Uncle Sam didn't want to do it. So nobody else did either. So I'm guessing, don't, like you said, don't know, but you could probably use a existing model of a pressurized tractor trailer type thing, and just put helium in it, and take.
And know the truck won't float off the road.
Yeah. And let's do a hydrogen or something like that. And, you could probably use the same trailer, but yeah, I'm sure that those cars would be supremely expensive to build.
At one time, the government strictly controlled who could buy helium. That's why you had the Hindenburg.
Mhm.
They weren't allowed to export helium to Germany.
Well, the two reasons on the Hindenburg, they used nitrogen for buoyancy, but apparently a lot of the research afterwards showed the biggest part of the fire was the envelope caught on fire, and that burned,
On the outside.
and the nitrogen, or
Well,
excuse me, the hydrogen fed that, but the real cause of the fire was the exterior was burning.
Yeah, they all leaked. It's just that the envelope was the problem, I think.
In the 20s, there was not enough helium to fill 2 of our airships, like the Los Angeles and the Macon. They had to take the helium out of one while it was in the hangar. It was hanging there.
Mhm.
They took the helium out of it to put it in the other airship. They didn't have 2 airships in the sky at the same time.
That kind of blends with the idea that the very first, those huge 3-tube tank cars in the 1920s, that's all they had to ship it with either. So there wouldn't be a big regular supply.
Yeah.
I bet it's a supply and demand problem.
Yeah.
You got
It was
very little demand, very little supply,
Mhm.
and to do it on a rail.
Well, we didn't have the space age then. We didn't have the electronics industry that
Yeah.
used a lot of it. We didn't have,
The Hindenburg Corporation there in Kentucky pretty well controlled a lot of the helium business. They were the production end of it.
Mhm.
But not here with the company. And it was very rare then. All of a sudden helium was a lot of different places later.
and you couldn't go down to the Five and Dime and buy a
No.
balloon that said happy birthday on it.
Utilities hate those balloons.
Very, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Bruce.
You're welcome.
All right, friends, and that's it. Thanks for coming today. Don't forget to go to Russell's. That's exactly right, Mike. Well, Russell, we'll see you shortly. Have some Cheetos out, all right?